Hey, this is Armpit. We're going to be doing a setup guide of an OSSM. This is going to be just the default setup with parts you could get from Research and Desire or from the Kinky Makers OSSM GitHub. The tools you're going to need are a 2mm hex that fits a 2.5mm grub screw, 2.5mm hex that fits an M3 bolt, a 4mm hex that fits an M5 bolt, and a small flathead screwdriver. And you can use just the regular Allen wrenches for this. I'm also going to be using just this small screwdriver tool to speed things along for the video. So first step is going to be to inspect our linear rail. It's very important that this slide not come off because it has bearings inside it. And if those bearings come off the edge, they will go flying everywhere. So you should have these little end stops installed on the belt, and you want to keep those in place as long as possible. So what we're going to do first is install our rear tensioner, which is this piece right here. We'll get our belt, and I find it's handy to the belt orientation is going to be like this with the grooves up against the bottom of the rail. I find it's handy to curve this just a little bit, and then this is going to be the orientation here. So curve it this way, and we want it to poke through this first opening just like that, and then we'll curl it around and go back under itself, and it'll come out with the grooves touching each other. So you can see we've got the grooves coming out, grooves on grooves. And just kind of pull that a little snug there. Don't need too much out on this end. We'll pull it just like 4 teeth showing. And then with this in place far away, we're going to go ahead and remove this end stop and then slide this in place. Might have to do a little wiggling. Make sure this stays on. Okay, so that's slid in place. Now I've got a little bit of loose belt here. I'm just gonna pull down on it until it snugs up. Okay, and then we've got our bolt to slide in this hole, and a nut for the other side. It's an M3 20mm. Go ahead and put my screwdriver together. Just hold that in place with my thumb. Just tighten this down. Doesn't have to be crazy tight. It's just to reinforce this this bridge here. Okay. Now we need to slide an M5 nut into this opening on the tensioner. And then we'll thread our M5 bolt into it. I believe this is a 20mm. The length is not super important on this one. And just finger tight until you can feel it start to touch this linear rail that's in there. And we'll just leave it. So we've got that much distance that we can tension later on. So now we'll just fold this belt out of the way, and we'll install the end effector, which is the threaded end, on this side. We'll remove our rubber end stop, set it out of the way. You can see there's indentions in this that match up with the indentions of the rail. So you just want to get that aligned. And then there's holes that'll line up. And these will be M3 8mm that go in there. And just kind of keep those from falling out, and put the nuts on the other side. Now we'll flip again, keep the nuts in place. And tighten things up. Once again, does not have to be insanely tight, just enough to hold it in place. So now this is not going to come off the rail, so we're safe to be a little careless with this now. So the next step is going to be to install our front tensioner, and we're just going to do this loosely at first. We'll take this belt, and this is kind of how it's going to route. It'll make more sense a little later. And this goes down into here with the screw hole on the left. We don't even need that much. And then this piece kind of sits in these grooves and the hole lines up. And then we'll take our M3, and this is where you can pick how much hard limit you want for your stroke. For this video, we'll just go ahead and put it all the way at the end, which this is a 350 millimeter rail. That'll give us around 20 centimeters of travel. Okay, and then we'll put our M3 nut on it. Just hold that kind of in place on the bottom. And for this right now, we just want it loosely attached because we will need to pull tension out of this later on. So this is just loosely attached. So next step is going to be to install our bearings in the motor head bottom plate. What I find handy is to go ahead and just pre-thread these just to make sure they're going to fit. Swap my screwdriver over for the M5. You want to make sure that this is perpendicular to the surface as it's threading in. Okay, both those holes feel good. So now I'm going to stack 3 of these bearings on here. And thread it in again. And I'm going to thread until it bottoms out. Not going to put a lot of force here, just it's bottomed out. Now I'm going to do the same with the other bolt. This is an M5 20 millimeter. And you can see I got a little crooked there. You really want to make sure it's straight. Tight until it bottoms out. Okay. And then just test that all 3 bearings spin freely. Now we're going to attach the rail to our awesome motorhead bottom. And currently, at the time of recording this video, the default orientation is to the left. Actually, I'm incorrect. It's to the right. I'm working on a firmware update that'll let you swap that in software, so not very important. But it is important to have the homing direction correct. So if it's backwards for you when you boot up, you'll want to change that setting. So I'll swap back to my other screwdriver. Just lightly get that in there. And we're going to go in a cross pattern, an X pattern. Also just lightly. These are M3 8mm. If you have longer, you can space the top of them with nuts, but the depth is pretty shallow in the linear rail where it's attaching. So now we can go a little snugger with these. It should all go together easy because this is metal in metal. And just give a small turn on each, get them nice and tight, hand tight. This is a critical connection. Okay, feels good. And now we're gonna kind of just route our cable, our belt. It goes above these bearings, just like that. And be careful not to pull this all the way out, but we do want a little bit of slack to work with. Okay, up next is going to be to place the pulley on our motor. You'll notice on the motor there's a flat side on the shaft, just one side, and you want one of these grub screws to line up with that. And this is where you're going to use this small Allen. I'm just lightly wiggling it while tightening, and I'm just barely getting this tight. We still want it to be able to move up and down for adjustment, but now it's tight enough on that flat spot it won't spin. And now we can start aligning things. So you want that to go over the pulley. We can just temporarily have some screws in here for alignment. And this is when we're going to pull a little of the tension out of this. Just like that. And that should pull this pulley into alignment. And now you can go in this groove here and just finish tightening it. And then rotate it a little, get the second grub screw to line up, and finish tightening that. And don't want to go crazy. I'm on the short end of the Allen and just putting force until it starts to twist, like the Allen key is torquing. Just like that. Another critical connection is those grub screws need to be against the flat spot on the motor axle. Okay, so now we'll tension this just a little on this side and then finish tightening this. And the tightening here will keep this from sliding. Okay, the final tension will be done with this later on. So now we're going to pull out our temporary bolts and we're going to install the awesome motor head middle. There's two different designs for this currently. There's this that has a built-in pivot, and there's this without the pivot. Both install similar ways, where these holes go over the bearing bolts. However, if you're using the one with the pivot, it's going to have the bolts coming in from the underside and nuts on top. If you're using the one without the pivot, the bolts will go from the top down and nuts will be on the back of the motor. So for this, I'm going to use the one with the pivot. I find it's easiest to kind of get the nuts in here by putting them on a bolt, kind of pressing in place and then unthreading the bolt. So I'll just do that for all 4. And then I'm going to set this on top. It has some protrusions here that line up with larger protrusions in these 2 corners. You just want to get those lined up. Kind of hold it all in place, turn it over as a unit. And then you're going to slide these bolts in. These are M5 35mm. And again, you're going to go in a X pattern when attaching these. And you just want it to start biting in that nut on the other side. And we'll come back around and do a final tightening. And this is also where you can decide where you want your electronics input to be. I usually prefer it on the bottom, this green plug. We'll come back to that. And the final bolt. And we'll go ahead and tighten this one more than we did the others, and then come back to all the others in a cross pattern and finish tightening. And this is where I'll use this Allen key just to show you how tight these are. Visual representation. I'm just pushing on this, the short end of the L, about, not like as hard as I can, but like just hard enough. Like you'll know when it's tight enough. Okay. And the last one. Okay. So now we're mostly assembled. We'll go ahead and do a tension. So to tension, you have this bolt that's poking out. Just want to hand tighten it for now. Just kind of as much as you can grip it by hand and twist. That's kind of the tension you're looking for. Okay, and you can kind of move this to just make sure everything's lined up. We've got the belt in contact with the 3 bearings on both sides, and kind of aligned center on the pulley. So now we'll put the cover on, which involves some M3 8mm bolts. Go ahead and slide these into these 2 holes up here. Position it level with the top. and just kind of snug, nothing insane. If you go too tight, that nut will start spinning in there and you won't be able to get any tighter, and you might have difficulty removing it later. So do the same on this one. And sometimes they won't line up quite right and you need to kind of get your tool and just poke it into place. But in this case, I got it aligned just fine first try. So now these in the bottom, they kind of go in at an angle and gravity pulls them into place. Okay, and that's your awesome assembled. Now it's time to move on to the electronics. So we have our awesome control board here. And we have this PCB extrusion frame mount for it. There is a small protrusion on this side that the board will slide under. And it's a little bit of a tight fit, but you just want to kind of persuade it to go into place there. And then we'll use 2 M3 bolts to secure it here. Just barely needs to be tight. It's just to hold the board in place from moving around. And I'm using 10mm length. For this, 8mm is also fine. You can go as long as 15. Okay, so I've got both of those in. That one looks like it could use another turn. Okay, and now I'll put the cover on. Same length M3 here, 8mm minimum, 15 max. You could probably get away with a 16. Okay, that's our electronics board assembled. So now we're going to wire. So in your kit, you should receive a small length of wire, red and black. The ends may not be stripped. You need to strip them if they're not. Should have about that much wire visible, exposed, and just kind of lightly twist the ends to keep the strands together. At this point, we'll tip the motor so we can read the label here. It's got voltage plus is on the right, then ground, PU plus, PU minus, direction plus, direction minus. So we're going to put our red wire in the plus voltage. I'm going to need to switch over to the flathead tip. And there's a small screw here. Go ahead and loosen these on the right. And these kind of just slide in. And then you tighten the screw back. And then just give it a small tug, make sure it's in there nice and secure. And then inspect and make sure there's no stray wires between, because if there's stray wires between, it could cause a short. Okay, and we'll connect the red and black to the plus and minus on this board. Red to plus to match what we did here. Loosen these a little before. So you want to make sure there's not much exposed metal, but it's imperative that these screws clamp down on the metal wire inside. And just once again, snug it. Inspect for any stray wire, and then give it a light tug test. And now we're done with our voltage input to the motor. Now we're going to take our 4-pin data cable and connect it to the board. Should get a nice click when it's in there. And then also on the board is labeled, it's hard to see in there, but from the right to the left is PU plus, PU minus, direction plus, direction minus. So we just want those to match up here. So we've got our black wire is hooked to PU plus. This instance of this wire has a fancy ferrule tip on it. I'm not sure if all the kits are going to have that or not. If you just have wire, once again, you need to make sure it's stripped, about that much wire exposed, and then just twist it to keep the strands together. So we'll put this in the PU plus and tighten down on it. Next we have PU minus, so that's next in line on the motor as well. Next in line we have direction plus. Line that up with direction plus on the motor. And then last is direction minus. And then again, just give everything a light tug test. Make sure everything's connected. So at this point, we're ready to do our first test. I'll put this 24mm nut on here. This is how you'll secure most attachments. We've got our awesome remote that I'll attach to the RJ45 Ethernet port. And then your power source will plug in here. When we plug this in, it's going to boot the board. You'll see the remote light up and the homing should begin. You want the homing, the correct homing direction is the threaded end extending first and then retracting. And that's the complete homing process. So now we'll just do some test. We'll select stroke engine. We'll set a small stroke, small depth, and then add some speed to make sure it moves. And that's your awesome assembly. In the next series, we're gonna look into possible upgrade paths